Hello, guys. New little setup here, but I wanted to do a live stream. I haven't done one for a while, and I wanted to talk about a topic that's very controversial that people have been continually asking me about, quite relevant because it's to do with the new presidential election, the new president, what you could expect for, uh, feminists, females, and immigrants in general alike, because there was a lot discussed in regards to this during the presidential election and how it's going to impact us. And having talking about how the immigration laws and the policies here in Korea have been really favorable for foreigners, I thought this was really relevant. But then I also think that there's like a lot of communication around everything here. And, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in probably another follow-up vlog on the main channel, but I wanted to talk about some of the more stickier stuff like feminism. Anyways, let me just double check that the audio and everything is doing good. I don't know if anyone's on. Let me know if you're on, guys. Okay, everything looks good. Looks good. All right, so I didn't realize that this is what is being said about the Korean presidential election until a lot of my subscribers reached out to me and said, is this president anti-feminist? The Western media is making it out to be that he got elected just simply on anti-feminism. And there's two parts of that question. First of all, I could tell you that the president did not win on his anti-feminism policies. Koreans are far more concerned about a whole variety of other issues, and it's not just feminism. And I honestly just think it's probably a lot of feminists in America that are trying to, make this issue about feminism so that they could just get it out there. It's probably very catchy, but the anti-feminism aspect of this presidential election is probably the misunderstood part by the West, because I don't think there's any context that is explained in regards to how feminism is in Korea. Feminism is so extreme that even Western feminists come out here to Korea and don't want to associate themselves with the feminists here in Korea. So being anti-feminist is not the same as being anti-feminist as in the Western sense. But and also the whole Ministry of Equality, I think that's what they call it in English, that's tied up in the middle of all this, isn't even the Ministry of Equality. It's like a mistranslation of the Korean word. So to get to that, here I'm looking at an article and I can totally see why you guys think that, because here is even a Korean person writing for the Washington Post on opinion, how South Korea's anti-feminist election fueled the gender war. Yeah, I honestly think that that's not a correct statement. If I just had to just comment on that, gender war has been fueled a long time ago in Korea. And this presidential election is probably like the culmination of it, where it's not such a big issue in Korea, but it's like boiled over into a point where it's something that needed to be discussed to get people in they call it the MZ generation, the millennials and the Gen Zers, those guys to vote. Even here, she admits that the opposite president, the opposing president from the Liberal Party, he was also like on this anti-feminism bandwagon, and when he realized that he just wasn't getting those votes, he switched his stance in the very end to try to get the feminists to vote for him. And this whole presidential election, I just want to throw it out there, I'm not like a fan of either of these presidents. I'm completely neutral on this. I'm just trying to share this information for your benefit, but obviously he's going to have my opinions on it just because nothing can be completely unbiased, right? But my opinion on this presidential election is it was a circus. It's like it's so similar, in my opinion, to the election between Trump and Hillary. It's in the sense that people are voting not because they particularly support one representative, but they're just like, who do you hate more? You know, like it doesn't matter which one of these guys are going to get elected. They're probably going to have pretty low approval ratings for the rest of their term. But yeah, I mean, so in that sense, it's just like, I'm not here to say one is better than the other, but just to give you guys some context on it. And let's just say that being a conservative, you're probably gonna come across as a supporter of men's rights, since you're the Conservative Party. So even that other president from the Liberal Party, he's just realized he's not gonna get those votes anyway, so he switched in the very end. But the particular issue that they're talking about is this Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, right? That's the English name for it. But it's a complete, like, I don't know. That what it says in Korean is 여성가족부. And what that means literally is 여성 is female, family, 부 is like ministry, I guess. So it's a female family ministry. And it is a ministry that was created to support women who are single mothers. And this was created, my understanding, like back in the 60s or 70s. And at that time, this would have been very relevant because, I mean, admittedly, Korea was much more patriarchal back then. I'm not even going to get into argument if it's patriarchal right now or whatnot, but I mean, as a relative, it's like there's no doubt, no one's going to argue that back in the 70s and 80s, it was much more patriarchal. There was definitely much more discrimination against women, working, etc. And it was required to support these single mothers who had children, and they couldn't support them, right? But the whole reason this is becoming an issue is not because it's the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. As a matter of fact, even this current president, he hasn't really, it's not very clear whether or not he's going to get rid of this or he's going to actually, how do you say, reform it. Why did I forget that word? So that it actually is a ministry of equality, in a sense that it's going to be unbiasedly going to support both male and female single, fathers or mothers, because both of those people could be disenfranchised, right? Is it possible that Korea is still very patriarchal and, the people that are in the biggest need are women? Possible. But as long as you meet the criterias of probably whatever income you need to be making or whatever, whether it be male or female, if that is the case, it'll still probably mainly support women, right? But it just didn't seem relevant in this day and age when you're talking about females graduating at just the same rate or more higher for higher education as males in Korea. They're getting just as much professional. I mean, there's been a lot of reforms in Korea where now men feel somewhat disenfranchised. But this gender war started, let's just say, a long time ago, and there's a lot of articles. This article, let me see when it was made, 2021. This was recent, but how feminism became a dirty word in South Korea, but I think this was probably the start of it. This group called Medallion. This article was from 2016, but this group formed in 2015. So it's been a while since this Me Too movement, feminism movement started. And unfortunately, for the true feminists out there that are actually seeking for and looking for equal rights, this group unfortunately sort of took your thunder and in Korea, and they sort of define feminism in Korea, which is basically synonymous with hating men. And if anti-feminists are misogynists, they're misandrous, right? I mean, just their logo alone, you can tell. It's just like that is pointing out to like how small a Korean man's penis is. That's what their logo is, right? So you can it's not something that you don't do that unless you're wanting a war, right? Now there's arguments as to why they had to do that. It was in response to like another group that was like very misogynist and how do you say why am I forgetting these words now? It was like an incel misogynist group that they sort of combated, but the feminist movement sort of rallied behind them, and it was a gender war. That's basically what I'm saying. So it just sort of got all messied and muddled up, and feminism became associated with misandry, so there isn't really anybody out there in Korea that is pro-feminist in the form that it's feminism in Korea like this, right? So that's why I even had the liberal president sort of siding with the anti-feminists, which isn't really, I would say, a movement per se or that big of an issue. So I would say that is just a very small, minimal issue, but it was overall in the scheme of just how illogical things were getting in Korea, and the candidates were trying to say, especially the one that's elected, that he's going to have a lot more, logical policies going forward. And I would say there's probably more instances of how things are being handled during this COVID situation, with how certain businesses were being discriminated against, and there was some kind of nonsensical curfews and policies against certain businesses, or like religious institutions that you weren't applying to big corporate businesses, etc. So all of this was sort of tied into, hey, we're going to reform it so things make sense. And why do we have, for example, this ministry that only supports single mothers, and how is that even anywhere related to equality between the sexes, right? So I think that's sort of how that got tied in, but the Western media got that and spun it around and made it seem like this was like the main thing that the president was the president-elect was campaigning on, when actually there's a lot of misinformation surrounding that. Let me see, go ahead and see if there's anybody. Ooh, nobody is commenting. Do I not have see, I haven't live streamed for a while, but check that. Okay, it's I hope I made it public. I think it is started from, okay, well, whatever the case. So I think that's where the misinformation sort of is on the anti-feminism. I mean, it certainly isn't going to help feminists, this president, I don't think. He's not here to push, advocate for females, but I don't necessarily think he has this agenda. And in his own words, he has no agenda to sort of go after females and take away their rights, like this president that's been elected, by the way, is accused of flip-flopping on issues so much. He's just pretty much panders to whatever the populace is, the popular thing to do is, that you can't really even take anything on face value and think he's going to push those legislations through. And Korea is also a relatively democratic country where it's not like the president, it's not like he's Putin or Xi Jinping where he could just push through legislation he wants to push through. I think that's also a misconception, because there's a lot of Asian countries right now are either communist or military dictatorships, so the president has a lot of power. However, in Korea, the president doesn't really have that much power. It's like if you want to pass laws, it still needs to go through the judicial process, etc. And as much as even the current president, President Moon, was touting for huge reforms in real estate, etc., over his 5-year course, he wasn't able to, push through a lot of the legislation he wanted to, as far as housing, which, I just want to briefly touch on. That's probably the biggest issue and the biggest reason why he got elected, because the main platform that the previous president came on that people were hoping was going to change was the affordability of homes in Korea. He said, like, there's a couple things he said he would do, which is lower pollution. That's like a sort of sci thing, but no one's talking about that because pollution is sort of lower, and but it has a lot to do with the current COVID situation, the factories not running at full steam, etc. But his main thing was making homes affordable for everybody. But ironically, there has never been a time in the history of Korea recently where home prices have risen so much. And this happened because his policies to control home prices were very somewhat draconian in what they say tax bombing the wealthy, tax bombing people who have homes, and making it very unaffordable for them to own multiple homes and speculate on homes. And because he was about to push all this legislation through, which wasn't going to take effect for years, during that time, it seems like the people that are wealthy and had homes, the haves of the society per se, were increasing home prices out of spite for him, such as artificially, lots of processes to artificially inflate the home prices. And even though there's threat of home prices going down and them being taxed a bunch, they were just holding out until the next presidential election so that they could vote somebody who is going to reverse these policies that Moon was trying to push through. So that alone should be somewhat of a historical background onto, as are even feminists or women, are they going to really feel the impact of this new president? Certainly not anytime soon. There's got to be some kind of debating and policies ran through, but who knows? You could never predict the future. But I don't think it's that huge of a cause for alarm. But that was the main swing votes, because when you look at the presidential elections here and where the votes are coming from, it was probably one of the more polarized. It was very close. It was only like a 1% difference, but it was one of the most polarized, in the sense that if you look at the Jeollado, which is the southwestern region of Korea, they were voting 80-20 for the liberal president, like 80-20%. It was huge. The gaps were huge. And then you go into the Gyeongsangdo province, which is historically a conservative area. So you have red and blue states literally in Korea, where red is conservative, blue is liberal, just like America. And Jeollado would be liberal and Gyeongsangdo would be conservative. And they held on being conservative like usual. I mean, the previous conservative president screwed up so much that, yeah, at least in the main city centers, President Moon was getting huge votes from liberals, but they weren't able to turn that around. So it was very standard. And what really pushed them over the edge was in Seoul, in the center, where all the real estate prices are really high, and people have a self-interest to financially to make sure that this conservative president gets voted in to reverse Moon's taxing policies, they voted heavily in favor for this current president. That's what caused him to be elected. I think, this idea that this presidential election was about feminism is a complete lie. There's elements of it, but there's just as many bigger and more important issues that Koreans are concerned about that they voted on. And I would say they voted on their self-interest probably this time and voted for a president that's going to maintain their, home prices, because most Koreans, their wealth is completely tied up in real estate, just that one really expensive apartment. And the prospect of that, going falling like the liberal presidents want it to do, so that homes are more affordable, it sort of backfired on them because there's more haves in this country than have-nots, I guess. So, yeah, that's why they mainly voted that way. And there are some clever like financial tactics that the president elected, such as proposing higher gains for higher caps for capital gains tax for cryptocurrency, etc., to also get the votes for MZ generations. And because there's a lot of stock speculating and such like that from the younger generation, etc. One interesting aspect of the presidential election that I was seeing on the news is that, oh my gosh, this thing just does not want to focus. This is quite annoying. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just like, what is going on here? Let me read the. Oh, finally, there's comments. Let me go ahead and just. This is really annoying. Oh, why is it not doing this? Okay, I'm just gonna go to manual focus, guys. Oh, sorry. Whoa. I was gonna go to manual focus. Jeez, this is so annoying. Okay, it might not be the best focus, but it's gonna be better than it just continually shifting and me moving forward. Okay, let me go ahead and what? It's not focus. It's the depth of field is really shallow. Huh? Mute? Mute? What is going on? Having technical issues, guys. Is it on? Is it on? Okay, it's on. It's finally on. I don't know where it sort of ended. Okay. Why is it muted? Hello? Hello. Testing. You guys hear me? Why is it muted? Okay. Sorry. I have no idea what's going on with this. But it was muted and somehow the camera was off. But yeah, just to summarize, I was giving experiences of how there's a lot of advocacy groups for foreigners here, and unlike my experience is sort of living in Thailand, where advocacy groups, first of all, there's not many like Thai advocacy groups that advocate for foreigners. Like in Thailand, all the advocating comes from foreigners and expat groups, etc. And the general Thai public sort of sees expat groups not in a very favorable light, I think. But in Korea, there is not only just advocacy groups within expat groups that advocate for different types of expats, which is, that in itself is saying something, but like Koreans that are advocating for foreigners, etc. It's just like a whole different level. And I think there is a realization from everybody, all Koreans, that having foreigners is essential to sort of the survival of the country, you know. And it's on a trajectory where it's immigration and having foreign immigrant populations is going to become a fabric of Korean society. Korea, you know, as you may already know, models itself like after America quite a lot. So it's somewhat of an inevitable thing. And there is I like also having worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and such here in Korea. Like the insight that I get is that they're really pushing for some of these diversity and humanitarian. Like they want to be viewed as a leader of these types of policies, where they're a leader in the world as far as promoting values of diversity and racial equality, etc. So yeah, I don't expect like a lot of people are have apprehension that this current president is gonna go like really extreme and crack down on immigration and like have all these anti-immigrant policies, but he never like I haven't heard him actually say that I have anti-immigration policy. It's mainly that he wants to make it fair, where he's targeting possibly like certain policies that are unfairly giving immigrants an edge over Koreans, which, you know, there's a lot of immigrants that I've talked to who have expressed, yeah, I mean, I have to admit, as a foreigner, if I'm like a foreigner married to a Korean, for example, they say there's like a policy in Korea where if you're underprivileged, you could put yourself into a lottery to get affordable housing, right? That's one of the biggest things because housing is one of the biggest costs in Korea. So if you're a young couple, you first of all get higher up in that lottery, or if you're like really old, you get higher up in that ranking. So it goes to people with the most need. And this should sort of tell you something. If everything is the same between two married couples, but one couple is has a foreigner, is married to a foreigner, they're ranked higher in that priority. You know what I'm saying? So there is like, I wouldn't say discriminatory policies against natives. Like that's just extreme. I would just say right now there is favorable policy for immigrants in Korea over even locals. And the reason they say that they have that policy is statistically, immigrants are more likely to have children statistically. Korean couples are less likely to have children. And because Korea is really pushing for policies that will encourage increased birth rates, because like what Korea is literally in an existential threat right now of disappearing because the birth rate is going down, right? So not only that, but even the establishment, the older people are concerned because we all know this kind of age scale where the baby boomers, there's so many of them because you know, our grandparents had a lot of babies, and then the baby boomers just didn't have as many children. So by the time they get old, then who's going to support the country and them? You know, like it doesn't matter whether or not you have children or not. That's one way of being supported, but the country itself will not be able to support the Asian people. You know, so there's apprehension about birth rates from everybody, particularly the old, because it's just you need to support the country's economics. It needs to continue to grow and have a positive GDP. Korea is relatively compensated well with technology, etc. But you know, this is definitely one aspect of policy that they're championing, and immigration is seen as like an answer, a solution to all of this. So they're not going to have anti-immigration policy. He hasn't announced that I'm going to have anti-immigration policy. This is just like projected fear by many people who see like this situation with him having an issue with the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, which actually isn't the Ministry of Equality, but Ministry for Single Mothers. And then like overanalyzing it and saying, oh, you know, he's gonna have anti-immigration policy. It's not right now. Like Korea is so pro-immigrant that sort of working out the kinks and making it seem like it's fair for everybody. It might be like a nice little balance shift, but like all of this, guys, it's all relative. You really don't know what's gonna happen, so it'd just be interesting to see. But the way I see it is I'm quite interested in seeing how things turn out because, you know, clearly with the previous administration, it's obviously if another liberal was going to get voted, it's going to go very pro-immigrant policy. There was even going to be even more reasons to immigrate to Korea, etc. But even if under this conservative president, you know, immigration policy is good and it's improving, etc., like that would be a very good indicator for me to have an idea of whether or not like very long-term immigration to Korea is viable. Um, but another thing I want to touch upon this is, although the Western media is making it out to be about feminism, and a lot of expats are concerned about anti-immigration policy, I pointed out he got voted mainly because of the swing votes from the. Let me make sure it's not muted. Yeah, it's not muted. He got voted mainly because of the swing votes from the real estate issues. But to me, my own personal concern is the geopolitical issue. Because I clearly remember the last time there was a conservative president, because something that's sort of synonymous with liberal and conservative presidents is that in Korea, if you're liberal, you generally side more with China and understand the practical need to have China as an ally because they're simply the biggest trading partner. You know, it's arguable whether or not strategically America is a more important trading partner because, you know, Korea pretty much acquired all its tech and manufacturing know-how, etc., with America, right? And America still remains a very important market, but you know, my understanding from the research I've done is China is still the biggest trading partner. Um, Either way, even if they weren't the biggest, you know, if it was only like 20%, it's still a significant enough. You don't want your GDP to like disappear by 20% overnight. So there's a practical reason for having China as an ally. Um, So liberal presidents are more pro-China, especially because China also has a very socialist type of government, and this is where they sort of become labeled as communists, etc. Because liberal presidents generally have more socialist policies. Um, is it communist socialism though? No, nowhere near. Not as far as proposing like very autocratic leaderships, etc. Not necessarily, but I think the current president got a lot of flack for it because there was just like a lot of authoritarian types of ways that a lot of these COVID policies were pushed through. So that was a concern. Maybe that's one of the other reasons that this president got voted. But the conservative presidents, like the previous one that sort of got impeached, etc., they generally have a closer alliance with America and have a more. It's not like they want an unfriendly relationship with China. I don't think no one's on record saying, you know, we want to just like China's our enemy or anything. No, nobody wants to do that. It's just idiotic because China is right next to you and they're the biggest trading partner. But probably a more firm stance against China, etc. So this president is reported to possibly want more THAAD missile systems, anti-missile defense systems, etc. The last time this happened, it was like pretty edgy here in Korea, you know, like relationship with China went really bad. China was boycotting a bunch of Korean companies, etc. But I think this could have, like, there's been a lot of recent issues with China within Korea. Like, Koreans were taking issue. I'm not even gonna go into all of this, but you could research, like, there is a lot of sort of anti-Chinese sort of sentiment here during the Beijing Olympics, etc. So I think that's why they were more like, this president wasn't seen as too bad as far as saying, hey, sort of like, enough is enough, and wanting to confront China, etc. I'm not saying this is what I agree with or anything, but this sort of seems like to be the sentiment. But I'm concerned about it because, ooh, I'm sorry, guys. um, Start cam settings, camera, FaceTime HD camera. All right, guys. The other camera went off, so I'm pretty much wrapping up here. So let me just wrap up, and then ooh, I gotta change the audio too. Like, I put built-in pro mic, built-in. Let me try to get this mic in here. External microphone built-in. Okay. So I'm sort of concerned about it because not only that, when you go pro-America, then you sort of anger North Korea, and North Korea is also, like, if you see on the news, they're about to test these new ICBMs, etc. So the Pacific might be a little less peaceful. I honestly think that is, if I had to, like, talk about the negatives of living in Korea, that it might be nitpicking because the chances of anything really happening between North Korea or war with China happening, I mean, honestly, they've been talking about this forever and never happened. So it's really close to none. And I could think of more unstable issues geopolitically, as far as in Thailand or anything. I don't think they're any particularly better. But if I had to nitpick about anything in Korea, because being an immigrant here is quite nice, it would probably be the geopolitical issue. And this president is probably not going to. Uh, his policies aren't going to make things nice. It's going to be confrontational, more so than the previous one. Whether or not that's a correct policy or not, it's like, geopolitical issues is always a balance, right? You don't want to just be a complete pushover, but you want to do this tactfully. But being that he has zero political experience, what's gonna happen? Who knows? That's probably a much bigger concern for Koreans in general than anti-feminism, all this stuff. Like, Koreans, they got much bigger problems to worry about than feminism, etc. And I'm also gonna do a video about feminism because people keep asking me this, and did I live stream about this? But I really wanted to understand you guys and why you guys are so concerned about feminism in Korea. And I'm like, I mean, why are you so concerned about this? It's not going to impact you. That's what I keep saying, right? And honestly, that is my stance. It's not going to impact you. But I wanted to understand why you're so concerned about it. So I was on Facebook, and there's like a Facebook group that I'm in. It's called Subtle Asian Traits. It's just a bunch of Asians and stuff that talk about, like, subtle Asian traits, and like, I've been using that sort of as a social experiment to sort of engage with people in the West and see, like, what they're thinking, you know And being that, I'm Asian American, I did subtle Asian traits because, there's I wanted to engage with people that I know are gonna be from like same kind of areas, like urban centers that I've lived in, etc. Because maybe if I engage with people from like Alabama or something, I don't know if they were like that before, but I have at least a reference with these kinds of people because I know how they were like 10 years ago. But I would have to say my eyes were open. I sort of see why you guys are concerned about it because, like, for example, like I was recently involved in like a very long thread, and I didn't even try to talk about the patriarchy or something. It was like a post, and some like girl had some experiences with parents that were very pressury and had high expectations of her. um, but then she decided to label the article, um, "How I Survived the Typical Patriarchal Asian Home," you know? And I'm just like, I just pointed out simply, like, this doesn't seem, I think it's like a stretch to label all Asians as patriarchal homes when it's based on just anecdotal experiences of just your family. And this doesn't even seem to be anything to do with patriarchy. It was just parents that have high expectations. In your case, it seems like, you know, it's your father, which is a valid like argument. And it's not like I'm the only person pointing this out. It's like a lot of people on there. Um, but then like I had just, and I said it in like a very joking manner. I was just like, I wasn't even really trying to get into a debate about that. But then, oh my gosh, I just had a bunch of feminist people hop on there and say you are marginalizing a feminist, disenfranchised people, etc. And I'm just like, I'm not. I never disagree that there isn't patriarchy, but it's just like I just think that this is a bad example, and in my experience, I've had experiences of matriarchy in Asian families just as much as patriarchy, in a sense that, like, when it comes to education, for example, there's a reason why we say tiger moms. We don't say tiger dads because the the gender that's probably most uh, responsible for putting pressure on you as an Asian is probably your mother. Like, not your dad. He's too busy out there like making money or whatever, right? To care about your grades as much. Um, so I was just like, this is just a bad example. Not saying that this isn't patriarchy, but just like broad labeling, like probably the most diverse, ethnically diverse, and largest group in the world as typically patriarchal is I think it's like only encouraging racism because you're generalizing off of just one anecdotal experience. And I don't see how this is any less racist than, a group of non-Asians generalizing about Asians based on a group's experience, right? But anyways, oh my gosh, long story short, like this it was like I was trying to be reasonable and like actually talk about the issue, even though I didn't want to talk about the issue because they brought it up, and then I was just going into like personal attacks, like you're a misogynist, and like you're like circle jerking with a bunch of your friends or blah 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 when other guys agree. Like it was just abusive attacks, and I'm just like, I see now. Like you can't really have a reasonable conversation with feminists in America, and I guess even when you're not really seeking to talk to them, they're just everywhere or something, like. So I was just like trying to raise awareness for racism because this seemed like very generalizing, etc., and it just all of a sudden became issue about uh, feminism. And I like in that thread, there's even women that are coming and in my defense and saying, hey, you know what, like this is a little too extreme, etc. And then they're going after the women. So it's just like, oh wow. So I would say there isn't, yeah, I mean, this I still want to think that that's a minority of people in America. It seems like just like Korea and everywhere else, the most vocal people are the most extreme people. So even like feminists in Korea, they're, I think, a very small minority, and um, it seems that they're clearly isolated to like sort of internet trolling culture. So you don't really hear or see them in public. Like they're like, I have not come across like feminists. If anything, most of the girls I come across are the opposite of every feminist value. You know, like I've certainly come across very like girls that seem to be wanting patriarchal societies for their life. They want a man to take all the responsibility of providing. They want to be they don't want to work when they have children. They want to raise children. There's a higher percentage of those kinds of women than women out there that saying, you know, I don't want to, I hate men, I don't want to marry men. I've never come across anybody like that. It seems like, if anything, Korean girls are just way too guy crazy and so like desperate to have families and stuff. I would like some actually really more feminists here to bring more of a balance to it. So in reality, no, you're not going to have any issue with feminism. If anything, you might have issue with patriarchy because it's just too patriarchal here, in my opinion. But I mean, you might like that. Who knows? But I'm someone that sort of likes more of like a balance between the sexes and like, you know, equality between the sexes. So yeah, I mean, what you see on the internet and what actually really is happening, I think there's a disconnect, and that's honestly the main point of this. I'm not here to like make a statement and say one is better than the other, but these examples, these anecdotal examples that I'm pulling out, are just my experiences to show you that it's like there's many contradictory like everything in reality is somewhat contradictory to the rhetoric that's being put out there by the media, in my experience. So you don't have to worry about it. I'm not worried about, you know, anti-immigration or anti-feminism right now, nor am I worried about, you know, something drastic happening and us going to World War III in the Pacific over China and Korea going at it. I'm not worried about any of that. I think all of this is just too early to tell. And knowing that Korea is a relatively democratic country, I believe you know, things are just gonna move at a snail's pace as far as any legislation is concerned, especially because Congress is very split right now. Consider this: the birth rate is so low, it doesn't matter what the policy is, except for the policy proposal to combat feminism. Agree or disagree? I don't know. Birth rate is so low, it doesn't matter what the policy is, except for the policy proposal to combat feminism. Agree or disagree? Even if the birth rate is, I mean, I think this is all relative. I'm not gonna deny that there isn't a possibility that feminism could get so extreme that the birth rate could go down to zero, but that isn't the issue now. The birth rate issue in Korea is less to do with feminism, and I think it has more to do with uh, rising class gap, inflation, these kinds of macroeconomic issues that make having children unaffordable. Um, it's possible feminism is playing part of it, sure, but what's clear is, you know, to a certain degree, even if feminism didn't exist, um, women are it, patriarchy existed for sure back in the 70s in Korea. And you know, I'm not like I'm not a feminist. You guys all know this. But I mean, just logically speaking, it wouldn't be fair to propose that that's what we revert to in Korea just to increase the birth rate, because there's just it was just really unfair for women. There's like you know, you could get like physically abused and they had almost like no legal protection, etc., in Korea in the 70s, you know. It's like it's not even like 5 years ago where Koreans had this, like people had this misconception that Koreans like or Korean men are very abusive, you know. So, right now I think it's just growing pains. Korea's dealing with the balance of, the right amount of rights that should be given favorably to women to get them to a point of equality, where things are equal, and also women reconciling the cultural differences of our parents and not expecting that men are going to be able to provide for them, etc., because they asked for equal pay. So now they need to put up equal amounts in a family. You need to equally provide. If you got equal pay, you equally provide. I mean, that should be the expectation. But there's a bit of disconnect between this two, and I think that's what the growing pain is, because there's still a large majority of Korean women that do not want to equally provide. They just want the men to provide and them to focus on raising children, which is noble. I'm not saying that that's bad or whatever, but it doesn't reconcile with the idea that society should be working to provide equal pay in the statistical sense. The reason why equal pay statistics are screwed up is, if you have you should have equal opportunity and equal pay for the same kind of jobs. But the reason it always skews towards men on average, if you look at all age groups and say, on average, do men have more or not? First of all, a lot of that has nothing to do with the current job situation, but a lot to do with the patriarchy, and as far as estate, handing down wealth estate wise, nothing to do with government policy, because we all know that the income of the top 10% is going to dwarf the income of the bottom 90% that are actually working. So average income is not a very good measure of the actual like pay equality for laborers, because it's taking into account upper echelon, upper class, that's going to dwarf any of the income statistics in the bottom. Second of all, if society can never reconcile and change where the expectation for everybody is that women need to provide for the family and earn on an equal level with the men, and when they're marrying have no expectation that they are going to not work, or put a little more of the burden of earning to men, you're always going to have screwed up statistics, especially in Korea, where even if 20% of the female workforce decides that they're going to not work and raise children, because the highest earners are going to be the ones that are going to stay in the career and go past 40s, 50s, and 60s and have the really truly high earning potential. It's like you're going to have 80 to 100% of the male workforce. It is not an apples to apples comparison. So the statistics, as far as the way they calculate statistics for equal pay, is already sort of screwed up, and I think it's designed to push like not feminist, but like female supremacy policies forward. That I think is really hard to have a discussion around this, and feminists can argue about this all they want, but men are they experience it. They know, it's like more than statistics. When you're experiencing it, discrimination as a man, because companies need to have pro female policies to make up for obvious inequalities that will arise due to the way that females don't. Well, some of the females are gonna want patriarchal society. Is gonna create some inequalities. So I think that's what's happening right now. Let's see. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna say that. There could be many reasons for low birth rates. It's possible it could be a little to do with feminism, but I honestly think increasing birth rate has more to do with economic policies, etc., going forward. So I guess it all depends. It all depends. It'll be interesting to see what the issues are. 3 kids from Ethan's family minimum. Where are all the hot young Korean ladies at? They're everywhere. China. Hi, Ethan. The domestic law protection in Korea was passed in 1997 in Los Angeles. Some of my LAPD cops I knew went out on so many calls for domestic abuse with Koreans in K-Town in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I mean, probably. Like, Koreans have been, like, the argument about patriarchy is, if anything, can only be related to modern day, you know. There's almost no argument that it was like Korean society in particular was very patriarchal in the 70s and 80s. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's pretty bad. So that's the problem though. The sins of our forefathers are carrying over, and then young men who have really nothing to do with that are suffering from that, because there's this concept of shared pain or whatever. So um, young women who have not experienced patriarchy in that sense uh, are acting like victims when towards men who had nothing to do with the abuses of our forefathers. So this is where now it's like the anti-feminist movement is like getting extreme. Like, you need to point out the actual inequalities, and I do agree there's still a lot of inequalities in areas of Korean law around protecting females that definitely need improvement. Like, even as a I'm not a feminist, but I could admit that there still needs to be reforms as far as laws protecting women. But there's also reforms that need to be done as far as laws protecting men, and like particularly this president, I think he's championing a lot of those laws, such as like stiffer penalties for women who falsely accuse men of sexual harassment when there isn't. Um, and yeah, that's an issue. I mean, and if it isn't an issue, nobody should care about it because, well, it's not going to impact anybody because there isn't this happening. But if it is an issue, yeah, I mean, there should be stricter laws around it, because it doesn't hurt, I think, females to have that. It only protects them, because um, if you have a lot of these people falsely accusing men of sexual harassment when there isn't, then the women that are actually getting sexually harassed, truly getting sexually harassed, are getting marginalized because their issue is getting lumped up amongst this whole volume of sexual harassment cases, some of which it could be, fake, and some of which aren't. So you need to really, I think it protects both men and women to have strict penalties against false accusation. I think that's like a reasonable thing that this guy is proposing, and I don't think it's necessarily anti-feminist. If anything, it helps to protect the females who actually do have valid like truly like bad situations of sexual harassment that they need protection on. So yeah, it's like I don't like to break down any kind of issue and only attribute it like a simple solution. I don't think you know feminism policy alone is going to solve the very complex issue of birth rates in Korea. Today, some of the young Korean men don't want to do conscription for 21 months in the military because there is no benefit or the rites of passage. It puts them at big disadvantage these days. Yeah, and I'm actually surprised that I mean, it's not that it hasn't been proposed. There has been, this is one issue I want to talk about. Thanks for bringing that up. When it comes to like anti-feminist policy, the biggest one that came like 5, 6, 7 years ago was they were proposing favorable like college admissions or employment opportunities for men that served in the military, and this was pushed back by you know female rights groups. I don't want to say feminist groups because feminism in Korea, again, is not the same as feminism in America, where they're seeking equal rights, so like equal, like women rights groups. And like it was like the parents, right? The parents who only have female children are saying this is unfair, you know, whereas parents of both mother and father, not just like men, is both men and women with male, children, were saying, hey, you know what? My son has to do 2 years in the prime of his life. And you know how Korea is sort of ageist. So, like, it's not even ageist. It's like acceptable to discriminate based on age. Because, in a practical sense, a younger employer is going to give you, more years of like good work, right? And so if because you have to train them, you have to invest into new employees. You want to make sure that you can get the most out of them. Plus, the younger they are, because Korea is very like, in a sense, it's just like people who are in higher positions, like they're ageist. It has nothing to do with sexism, but more of an ageist thing. If you're older, then it's sort of hard to boss them around because it's just culturally not acceptable, right? So if you, it makes a big difference, guys, because 1 or 2 years you'll get promoted to like, like if you go to a Korean company, they're organized in a sense like, oh, you have a team leader, and then within that team you have like the teri, the person that's sort of like the group leaders and the sort of higher ranking people below this. But 2 years might not seem like a lot, but it is in Korea, because as soon as you get out, like let's say the girl is getting employed at year 22, she's 22, she goes in, and she makes, in 1 year she's like higher ranking in that company, right? And then you have Korean guys, because they're going into the military and there's breaks in the system or whatever, and they're coming in at 24. Can you hire this 24-year-old for an entry level position? Because it puts you know these people that you've just promoted that are females that didn't have to do military service at a disadvantage, because it's really hard to sort of boss guys around that are older than them, because but they should be, because in the corporate sense they outrank them, they have more experience, so they don't want to hire these people. So like these kinds of issues happen. So the younger you are, the more advantageous it is, but Korean men are being put at a huge disadvantage. And then when like somebody else pointed out, like when it comes to sports and stuff like this, it's really huge. Like somebody, like there was this case that said, why are Korean women so successful in golf but Korean men aren't? And then somebody said, it's due to military service. I'm like, that couldn't make a big of a difference. And then people in professional golf told me, like, you're absolutely wrong, it makes a huge difference, because women have absolutely no break in their professional career. Like as a professional athlete, you go to the military for 2 years, that will screw you up in the prime of your life. When you're like at your best performing age, when you should be practicing every day, when you're like 21, 22, 23, but you have to do military service, that will put you at a huge disadvantage. And that's why there is a huge discrepancy. Although Korean men like golf more than Korean women, and they're learning at the same rate as Korean women, there is no dominance in the PGA tours, like Korean women have in the LPGA. So you could apply that to really any sport, So and then like a lot of the big issues are happening as far as even K-pop idols. K-pop idols, their primes are in their younger years. You only have like 5, 6, 7 good years to be a K-pop idol before you're too old to be a K-pop idol. But you have to spend 30% of that doing military service. So Korean men are really disadvantaged. And I realize now, like, oh, okay, yeah, why this is such a big issue. But like a lot of feminists tend to trivialize the issues that men have here, having to serve military, and create a gender war by basically trivializing and not being able to empathize with Korean men's issues, which in turn, like, has Korean men think like, why should Korean men be empathize with your issues, especially because the stuff you're complaining about, it's stuff like that parents had to go through mainly, you know, not you personally. And then it really takes away from actual stuff and reforms that do need to be made as far as inequality in workplace and gender discrimination that does exist against women, you know. So it's just like a big mess right now. And um, who knows if this president is going to be able to navigate that and actually bring both parties together, whatever. That's what he says. But, you know, I just have to say it's a very complex issue. But I honestly do think Koreans are handling this in a better way than Americans. Like in America, I think it's really impossible to like talk about gender issues at all because you just immediately get shut down. There can't be any debate. But the fact that Koreans actually can have a logical debate around these issues is what gives me more hope for Korea, right? And basically, this video alone here is just to tell you that the way that American media, Western media, is just like oversimplifying these very complex issues that Koreans don't take for that simplicity, and there's a lot more nuances to both sides of the argument that they're trying to resolve. I think it's like it's not doing Korea service, you know, like it's not portraying what's really happening in Korea. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, it'll be a lot of content for my YouTube channel, I guess, because I can give you guys updates on what's happening. But right now, honestly, there hasn't been any updates. The guy just got into office. The biggest thing right now is, you know, he's gonna probably have a summit with America, and you know, it's geopolitical issues right now. It's like his priority isn't uh, getting rid of anti-feminists and stuff. That's not his priority right now. Even Koreans don't. You know, this is just like a little sideshow that Western media is blowing up because that's just like it's just what gets clicks in America. You know. If you start a Chebol company, the salary starts at 3 million won, and after 10 years of non-CBS, they can double or triple, and it's called Hell Joseon. The Korean male athlete has to win a gold medal to be exempt from the service. Yeah. Um, yep. Yeah, and like, yeah, definitely. You could be exempt, but you have to win a gold medal, which, as you guys know, especially in the golfing thing, has anyone been exempt? There is no Korean that's been exempt. You know, like, unless you're like a childhood prodigy, where you could like, I don't even is. I guess you could win at the Olympic events in golf. Olympic golf. Like I don't think winning a Masters. I mean, if a Korean did win the Masters, maybe they will have to pass a new law that equates a Masters to a gold medal. But it's like it's very specific, guys. Even like soccer players, they're trying to win gold medals like at the Olympics. You know, even though winning, for example, the Premier League or something would be an even greater accomplishment. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very hard to like, yeah. And I think golf players get screwed probably the most because it's an individual sport. Less people are gonna win. Channel Park, Heung-min Sun, Shin Soo-chu got lucky to be. Oh, okay. By the way, King is Korean American expat sports talk. He knows a lot about this stuff. Channel Park, yeah, that guy is like a gem. Heung-min Sun, he won. I think Chisung Park also got exempt. No, right? I think Chisung Park also got exempt. Shinsu Chu, Choi Shinsu. Who is that guy? Shinsu Chu? Is he a baseball player? Win a gold medal in the Olympics, the athlete will receive 1 million won for 60 years. Yeah. Well, that's also good stuff. Both that has nothing to do with the military service, but one of the reasons that Korea is pretty dominant in sports is they do support their athletes quite well, I think, relative to a lot of other countries. So everyone is trying to win gold medals and perform well because you get a nice pension if you win it. Okay. Yeah, 1,000,000 for 60 months monthly. 1,000,000 is like $1,000, by the way, guys. So it's not like that much, but in Korea you don't need a lot to survive. Plus, but the main thing is if you win a gold medal in Korea, more important than this little allowance is you get a lot of fame, you get like instantly a lot of money, featuring in commercials, and you like have a job available for you being like a announcer at a major television network company or something. Because something about Korea is when they show the Olympics, it's not like America where only NBC has the rights to show Olympics. In Korea, they will show every large network has the right to show the Olympics. So this is like watching Olympics in Korea is really great because you have like uh, an option of three different networks to watch Olympics, you know? So like you don't like the announcer in this one, you can watch the other announcer. You know, you like the graphics in this other one, you can watch another one, and they have the rights equally to the Olympics, which is pretty cool. Partizan got exempt because of the World Cup in 2002. Yeah. Everybody in that 2002 World Cup got exempt. So yeah. I think Son Heung-min was trying to win the Asia Cup but didn't win it, and then and then Tottenham had to let him go, even though it was like in the middle of their season because they're like, we need you to win the Olympics or something, and then he finally won that, and then Tottenham like got a nice little landfall because that was one of the main reasons they like a lot of Premier League companies were teams were hesitant in signing Heung-min Son because they're concerned about the military service, guys. So I mean, this again is like a big issue. Like as a Korean, um, big sports teams will have, it's not invalid. It's very valid reason to discriminate against signing Koreans because they have this inevitable like military service, and not everyone can is as talented or as lucky as Heung-min Son, even though, you know, or maybe they could have been, but they were never given an opportunity to train and, you know, be in top sports in like you know, better leagues because they're outside of Korea because they're concerned of the military service issue. So yeah, military service is a big issue, and I think Korean men are doing a huge service to the country, and it's a huge sacrifice. Also, being, you know, paramilitary myself, I can empathize with that, and I can I can, you know, I can say that it is a much bigger sacrifice than it seems on the surface because after I joined the military, I was just like, oh my god, I didn't realize it was going to be this much of a pain in the ass. So I know exactly what it is, and every Korean man can empathize with each other because they all went to the military. So this is something that, you know, like there's women, just Korean women will never be able to understand. It's just as much as women like saying, hey, you know, men can never empathize with the trouble that we have to go through. Like they can't empathize with, you know, going to military. It's just, and there is like when you put your money where your mouth is kind of situation, you don't see a Korean woman advocating, hey, you know, we want to serve in the military too. You know, the Korean women don't say that. You know, so it's like there needs to be something done and reconciled with this. And the issue of gender equality is very different than the conversation that you have in America because of this mandatory military service. Because the fact that both women and men support the idea as a country that only men should serve in the military is killing the argument that genders are equal. You know, they should have equal rights, but it is, as long as you have the mandatory military service for men, uh, you can never have this argument in Korea that men and women are the same. They're not, because there is always an admittance that they aren't, and that's why only men are serving. And if women thought otherwise, they would be out there championing that, they should serve in the military, but they don't. So they themselves also admit that they're different. So this that's why it's like this argument about feminism and equal rights and stuff is, it can never be like America, because there is a greater expectation and responsibility put on men, not only just as a society for families, because I could tell you, the stuff that doesn't go into statistics, but you clearly see society expecting, such as in Korea, where women expect men to provide for the family, etc. This kind of stuff that doesn't go into statistics, it tells you that there is a different expectation. But even what goes into the statistics, which is, and like, that's like very objective, such as baked into legislation, such as a man's responsibility to have a greater responsibility to protect the freedoms of the country, and freedoms of the women to complain or whatever about feminism or whatever, because if they didn't, they'd be under North Korea, and they wouldn't have the right to even complain about sexism there. You know what I'm saying? So it's time for you to start sports career, king of the what? Son won the Asian Cup 2008 because I know Facebook put me jail just showing that kid. Oh, okay. Okay. Last time. Oh yeah. So it wasn't the Olympics. It was the Asian Cup. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Last time any Korean man had huge respect was when South Korea sent 100,000 troops to Vietnam. I talked to Ajushi and they speak highly about those men that served over there. Yeah. Very similar. Like, even in the military, even though I'm like in the military, we have first sergeants and sergeant majors that actually served in Vietnam. And within the military, within people, who served in the military, it's not like everyone is equal. Those guys we hold them in higher esteem, the guys that served in the Vietnam War, because we know that that was like one of the tougher wars, ones where you didn't even have much of a motivation to do it, but you just did it because you wanted to serve the country, kind of thing. So those guys are held in higher esteem. And even the guys in the Vietnam War held those who served in, like, World War II or the Korean War in higher esteem, because the Korean War was even more of a harder war. I heard, like, even more people died. So yeah, even within the Korean military, everybody has to do military service. So um, even though Korean men hold themselves in higher esteem over people who never had to serve, and also women who don't have to serve because they know the sacrifice it takes, they definitely also hold these people that served in the Vietnam War, etc., in an even higher esteem. And I'm gonna probably watch this other show. Like, there's one Korean show that I like where they put like the different branches of the military, of the Korean military, against each other in these little competitions. It's really fun. And it's not just Navy, Army like this. It's like special forces within each branch, and then but if you're in the special forces of each Korean military branch, because there's no requirement to do it. I mean, you could just go, because you have to serve anyways. You might as well just go, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna get paid anymore to be special forces in a Korean military or whatever. Why would I do that? I'll just take the basic easy military route. I'll do that. Or I'll be a Katusa, which is like a liaison for American military, which is an even easier job. I could just like stay home and just go out every day, Monday to Friday, and work. Like, people are trying to get the easiest way out of the military, but there are certain people that in Korea too are just so hardcore. They're just like, even though they're not going to get paid anymore, they're like, I want to do like special forces in the Korean military. And those guys are held in really high esteem too, because somebody's got to do the really shit job. And whatever motivated them, you know, more power to them. So there's that. Hey, I'm about 15 minutes behind the live stream feed. Yeah, kind of funny how the desire for equality goes out of the window when war breaks out, like in Ukraine. Yeah. So yeah, like the argument is it's really hard to argue patriarchy being oppressive, because you have to first um, understand the culture and understand if patriarchy was a choice by the women. You know, if there is an issue, it might be the issue of materialism, or you know, like these kinds of laws, like whoever has the money makes the rule kind of laws. um you know, if they want to blame it on anything, they could blame it on those concepts, because we live in a society where if you have more money, you make the law, you make the decisions around the house. You know, as a matter of fact, even if these people gave the decision to women, they would not want to take that responsibility, you know, because they don't want to respond. Like an example is, I almost married this girl, right? And I I said, she kept saying, I want an allowance, you know, I want like at least $500 a month just to spend on myself. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm not your father. I can't give you like a $500 allowance, especially when I'm on commission. Some months I could, some months I could give you $1,000. But if you're complaining about this, how about I just give you all of my money, and you can take responsibility for how you use that? And the girl's just like, no, why would I want the responsibility of handling the money? You know? And then I'm like, well, then you have no right to tell me how much of an allowance you should have per month. You should defer all of the responsibility on me as far as how much I provide for you, you know? It's just the logical thing to do. But, you know, like in modern day, like they think they can have the advantage of both worlds, like seek equal pay, but also not have any of the responsibility for providing for the family, which true feminists wouldn't agree with. You know, like true feminists are all about equal rights. So I could respect their point of view. But the problem with true feminists is that, unfortunately, a lot of women, I'm not even going to say majority or whatever, but a significant amount of women are screwing up their argument because they don't want the responsibility. If anything, they want patriarchy. They are choosing patriarchy on choice. So to say that patriarchy is oppressive is, this argument is starting to die down, because women are choosing patriarchy by choice. You know, especially in countries like Asia, where they don't want to work. They don't want to provide for the family. They want the man to do everything, and they want the man to make the big decisions, because they don't want the responsibility of making the big decisions. Because if you make the big decisions and you screw up, then uh you're gonna get, you're gonna get complained against, you know. So that's why I say, like, in some cases, you could see Asian families as a matriarchy, and men are just dogs to go out there and, um, you know, be corporate slaves, make the money, and be given the facade that they're making the big decisions. But the women really run things, because, you know, they have all the right to complain to the men if they're not providing enough for the family, etc. So men come home and they get complained that you're not making enough, blah blah blah. You know, even though they get to make the decision on, okay, maybe we should move here to make more money, etc., the whole catalyst behind why they need to move, you know, like make these decisions for the family, is because the woman is demanding more money or more support for the family, etc., like this. And none of a lot of this gets like lost in the argument, because people just don't understand Asian culture, you know. They just assume that Korean women are like American women, where, like, to some degree, American women aren't all like this. I mean, there are a lot of, there are also American women that just don't want any responsibility and want all the benefits and the same equal pay. Sure, there's people who try to arbitrage that way unfairly, but most American women I come across, more so than Korean women, have this expectation that if you're going to get married, you're going to work your ass off just like your husband. Sure, they might expect the husband to make more because they're still stuck in, you know, these cultural norms that our parents had, but whatever the case, they're going to work, and they want to equally, you know, do both things. But um, when a large majority of women are wanting the patriarchy, in a sense that they want to give all the responsibility to the men to make the big decisions and make the money, not because they can't, but they don't want to, you know, so they can nag and just, you know, stay home and whatever, then it kills the argument, you know. It just, so I think that's why this idea of patriarchy doesn't really fly as much in modern day Korea, because women are just, they want the patriarchy to some degree. And why you have like these extreme groups sometimes that are very anti-men, I think those people are very small minority. I never come across them, and I can only assume that they're just very sexually frustrated women, are just very unhappy for one reason or another, and just want to blame men for it, you know. And they're beyond that age of trying to appeal to men, so then they're just creating gender war. And likewise, you have a lot of incel men that are also sexually frustrated, just going back at each other, and it's just like a little sideshow circus. Um, but in general, you know, we all know that women need to be protected in our society, etc. And I think that's how Koreans are also. But because of this concept, I think a lot of this really extreme, like, sect of feminism in Korea grew so much that it just had to be sort of like, it was just a tipping point, you know. That's what it is. um, at one point 20 years ago, South Korea special forces were ranked top 5 in the world. I don't know about today. Yeah, I don't know. The higher you rise a woman up education, handouts, affirmative action, the higher her standards would be. Yeah, well, I don't want to talk about women's rights, blah blah blah. Anyways, this is it's just a you know, like, I don't want to like have an opinion on it, because it's all relative to how situations are, and we will just have to see how it plays out in Korea. I just wanted to say that the concept is just a lot more complex than Western media is making it out to be, and that it's not, this president doesn't seem to be anti-feminist in the same sense that we think of feminism in America, because feminism in Korea is defined differently. um, yeah, yeah. Anyways, so I'll just end it here. Sorry I haven't been able to live stream as much lately, but I'm making up for it with very long vlogs instead. And thank you so much for supporting it, guys. And I really appreciate you guys, you know, giving it a lot of likes and views. I guess I'll continue to go that route since you guys seem to be liking it. Yeah. And how long have I been live streaming this for? Jeez, it's been a while. Okay, I don't know. I haven't live streamed for a while. Like, why can't, it's like, the layout is really weird. Okay, guys. So thanks again, and see you guys next time.